J-Lo's testimony. Rocks. Diddy trial. Leonardo DiCaprio. Breaks. Silence. A courtroom reckoning begins. In what may become one of the most pivotal trials in entertainment history, the federal courtroom fell into tense silence today as two of Hollywood's biggest names, Jennifer Lopez and Leonardo DiCaprio, took center stage in a case that now threatens to dismantle not just a music empire, but a culture of secrecy that has long overshadowed the industry. The story doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins with a raid federal agents entering Sean Diddy Combs' homes in Los Angeles and Miami, unearthing a network of surveillance footage, private archives, and layers of mystery that would soon unfold under the national spotlight. Those raids marked the ignition point. What followed has been a firestorm. But the trial reached a fever pitch only when Jennifer Lopez, the global icon once romantically linked to Diddy, was seen entering the courthouse flanked by attorneys and surrounded by cameras. She wasn't just a witness, she was a participant in a story the public had never fully heard. Her voice didn't tremble, but the weight of her words shifted the entire room. Years ago, I stayed quiet, Lopez testified, but silence is no longer an option. According to internal courtroom sources, J-Lo's testimony did more than just revisit her past. It introduced new figures, new names, and a pattern of behavior previously shrouded by fame. She recounted moments at exclusive events, the discomfort she felt, and the warnings she received. But the real shock came when she pointed to a series of recordings, allegedly showing prominent individuals in troubling scenarios. While their identities remained sealed by the court, the implication was clear: this was not just about Diddy. The tension escalated further with an unexpected turn. Leonardo DiCaprio, rarely seen in courtrooms, and even more rarely involved in public controversy, was called to the stand. Clad in a black suit, his demeanor was composed, but as he sat down, observers noted a flicker of hesitation. "I didn't want to be here," DiCaprio began, "but I knew I had to be." His voice echoed across the wood-paneled walls as he recalled an invitation to an exclusive party, years ago, one hosted at a private estate owned by Diddy. At first, it felt normal, DiCaprio said. Champagne celebrities' laughter. But then things began to shift. He described a house with hidden corridors, restricted zones, and a carefully choreographed environment. Guests were ushered, guided, even subtly monitored. He spoke of the back room, a term that would take on chilling significance. Through a crack in the door, DiCaprio said he saw people lined up camera equipment and the unmistakable figure of Diddy giving directions. "I knew I wasn't supposed to see that," he said quietly. The gallery gasped. Journalists began typing furiously. The judge called for a brief recess, but the damage was done. When the court reconvened, DiCaprio continued, detailing a moment when he tried to leave, but was temporarily blocked. "They told me, 'Not yet. Your driver's delayed,' and then offered to escort me to a lounge." He described the lounge as cold quiet, with no phone reception. A place that didn't feel like a waiting area, but a message. He eventually left unharmed, but not unchanged. DiCaprio admitted he never told anyone. "No one would have believed me," he said. "Until now." The courtroom wasn't just listening, they were holding their breath. The narrative was no longer about a single incident or a personal grievance. It had become about a system, a design, and perhaps a reckoning long overdue. Outside reporters scrambled to update headlines. Inside, the jury sat still processing what they had just heard. Diddy, once the architect of an untouchable persona, now sat quietly, his jaw clenched, his legal team whispering frantically beside him. And just when it seemed like the revelations had reached their peak, the prosecution asked one final question for the day. "Mr. DiCaprio, did you ever encounter anyone who appeared to be held against their will?" Silence. Then DiCaprio responded with a slow nod. "Yes. I was looking for a bathroom. I heard sobbing. I found a door, and behind it, there was someone crying. Young, Alone. He paused. A man shut it immediately. Told me I was on the wrong floor, and that nothing caught my attention. The courtroom froze, and with that, the session was adjourned for the day. But the storm had just begun. The public, once passive observers, were now leaning forward. Something far larger than a celebrity scandal was unfolding. When the courtroom reconvened the next day, the atmosphere had shifted. The gravity of Leonardo DiCaprio's testimony lingered like smoke seeping into every whispered exchange between reporters, every furrowed brow among the jury. But there would be no time to absorb. The next wave of revelations was already rolling in. This time, it wasn't just about what DiCaprio saw, but about what it all meant. The prosecution picked up exactly where they left off. Mr. DiCaprio, the lead attorney, asked in the days following that party, "Were you ever contacted about what you witnessed?" Another pause. Then a quiet confirmation. "Yes." An anonymous number. A voice I didn't recognize. He recited the words they told him. "You saw more than you should have, Leo. Let it die." The courtroom collectively inhaled. And yet DiCaprio wasn't finished. "I didn't tell my team, not even my closest friends. I convinced myself it wasn't real, or that I was overreacting. But when the accusations began surfacing, when I saw the videos, the reports, I knew I couldn't stay silent." The prosecution leaned in, steering the direction with calculated clarity. "Did anyone else warn you?" Beyond the phone call, DiCaprio nodded again. "A fellow actor. Someone I trust. They pulled me aside at a film event and said, 'You were lucky to leave early?' They told me. Those gatherings had purposes that went beyond partying. It was about leverage, about control. There was a list." He let that word hang in the air. A list. "Yes," he replied, "of people who had been filmed, compromised, a tool for silence." The courtroom murmured. From the gallery to the press pool, the implications were too large to ignore. If what DiCaprio claimed was true, it pointed to a network of silence powered by more than money or status. It was engineered through fear. Then came another jolt. DiCaprio revealed that he had seen blueprints, house renovation plans that had been circulated discreetly among a group of insiders. The diagrams showed hidden rooms, surveillance centers, redesigned spaces that didn't appear in public records. Why would a music mogul need a surveillance hub in his mansion? He asked, not as a witness, but as a citizen. It wasn't rhetorical. The judge allowed a brief recess. Outside, the public was already reacting. Hashtags exploded. News outlets broadcast the footage of DiCaprio's solemn walk into the courtroom on repeat. A true crime storm was forming, and at its center was the quiet man in a black suit whose words had become louder than any tabloid headline. But back inside, the court pressed on. This time, the prosecution introduced the term that would go on to trend globally within the hour, the Lighthouse. "Mr. DiCaprio," the attorney said, "have you ever heard of that term in connection with these events?" He nodded. It was a code word, only used by a specific inner circle. If someone asked whether you'd been to the Lighthouse, they weren't talking about a place. They were asking if you'd seen the truth. And then for the first time, DiCaprio made a direct connection between Diddy and the political elite. "I never saw him in the house," he clarified, "but I saw him with high-profile political figures at private events. I remember an envelope, discreet but deliberate. It wasn't a gift. It was a message." He didn't name names, but one name surfaced regardless. Barack Obama. The courtroom stiffened not from a direct accusation, but from the possibility that this extended beyond entertainment. That the ripples from Diddy's empire touched circles previously thought untouchable. The judge issued a warning against conjecture. But the seed had been planted. Before the court adjourned for the day, DiCaprio read a message he had received from a former acquaintance. "They'll bury him if the truth comes out," the message read, "but they'll bury us too. Still, someone has to say it." He looked across the courtroom. "That's why I'm here." As DiCaprio stepped down from the stand, the audience rose, some in shock, others in silence. Diddy remained seated unmoved on the surface, but his eyes told another story. No longer the confident mogul, he now resembled something far different, a man watching his entire narrative fracture. And for the first time in this story, Jennifer Lopez returned to the spotlight, not with tears, but with resolve. Outside the courtroom, she addressed the press. "I was there," she said. "I stayed quiet because I didn't believe I could speak without consequences. But today, I believe it's time to rewrite the rules." As her words echoed beyond the courthouse steps, one truth became clear: this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. About reclaiming a space long held hostage by power and silence. As the trial moved into its third act, the courtroom began to feel less like a chamber of law and more like a stage where the myths of fame were being torn down one scene at a time. Cameras were still banned inside, but the world didn't need footage. The testimony itself was enough. It echoed beyond the marble walls, ricocheting through headlines, commentaries, and living rooms. Leonardo DiCaprio's departure from the witness stand hadn't closed a chapter, it had opened a floodgate. What followed was not just a legal reckoning, but a cultural one. The prosecution now turned to the infrastructure of Diddy's domain, not his music empire, but his estate, his guests, his rules. Witnesses from his former security team, assistants, and even caterers began to come forward under anonymity protections. Their statements painted a chillingly consistent picture. One former staffer described the estate as a labyrinth. "You don't just walk into Diddy's house," they said. "You're ushered. Every corner is watched. Every room has a purpose, and some of those purposes aren't celebratory." Court documents revealed a schematic of the mansion's underground floor, an unregistered space beneath the main hall. The design was confirmed through city permits, never publicly disclosed until now. The space included small windowless rooms, only accessible by internal staff. No guest had ever spoken of them, until now. DiCaprio had mentioned hearing crying from one of these spaces. Now his memory was no longer a lonely account. Another staffer testified. There was a list of names. Some were guests. Some were something else. We weren't allowed to ask. The courtroom atmosphere turned electric. Back outside, the public reaction spiraled. Online sleuths began connecting dots. Former guests at Diddy's events shared cryptic memories. A-list celebrities quietly archived photos. The culture of silence was eroding in real time. And then came the term that would redefine the trial's tone entirely: the Lighthouse. The term had been whispered among elite circles, but now it was being spoken aloud in court, in media, in podcasts dissecting every angle. According to witness accounts, the Lighthouse was not just a term, it was a code of access. A quiet confirmation that you had been exposed to the inner architecture of Diddy's most elite, most secretive gatherings. Only a few ever uttered it. Fewer understood its weight. But one high-level music executive testifying via recorded deposition summed it up best. If you were ever told you've been to the Lighthouse, that meant you couldn't go back. You saw what wasn't meant to be seen? The prosecution asked, and what exactly would you see there? The executive paused. You'd see the engine. Explain. It's how power was traded. Not money, not contracts, people, footage, fear. Suddenly, the legal proceedings felt like an expose on a parallel Hollywood one, not built on talent or brand, but leverage and shadows. Jennifer Lopez, watching from the gallery, reportedly wiped a tear as the testimony confirmed what she had once suspected, but never proven. Privately, sources close to her revealed that she had once nearly exposed the truth years ago after a particularly distressing event. But at the last minute, she was convinced to remain silent. She was told it would ruin her, said a former confidant, that no one would believe her and she'd be blacklisted. But the tide had changed. The era of doubt was dissolving. And with DiCaprio's voice lending weight, Lopez's silence had transformed into a catalyst. In a striking moment of clarity, the prosecution revealed that Diddy's team had attempted multiple times to legally suppress certain testimonies. But the court ruled against the motion. The Lighthouse was now part of the official record. At this point, even Diddy's defense team looked shaken. No longer disputing the existence of the parties, they began shifting strategy, questioning intent context framing. But the public wasn't interested in semantics. They wanted accountability. And they weren't the only ones. As the session neared its close, the judge allowed one final piece of evidence to be read into the record, a message allegedly sent between two industry insiders following DiCaprio's party years ago. It read, "He saw too much. Keep him close, or keep him quiet." A collective shiver moved through the room, then came the quietest moment of the day. J-Lo turned to the courtroom, her voice steady. "We kept pretending none of it mattered, that it was just another party, another headline. But this isn't about the spotlight anymore. It's about the dark behind it." With that, the judge called for adjournment. But everyone knew this story was far from over. Day 4 of the trial marked a shift, not in facts, but in tone. After days of cascading revelations, the defense was no longer simply reacting. They were finally ready to speak. And when they did, it was not with denial, it was with defiance. Sean Diddy Combs sat still as his lead attorney rose, buttoned his blazer, and addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a courtroom," he began. "This has become a theater, a spectacle, and my client has been cast as the villain before any verdict has been reached." It was a calculated tone, calm, polished, measured. But it was also too late to turn back the tide. Still, the defense pressed on. They began by reframing the Lighthouse as an urban legend, a term twisted by rumor and weaponized by fear. They argued that Leonardo DiCaprio's testimony, while emotionally compelling, was anecdotal and speculative. "Mr. DiCaprio is a brilliant actor," the defense reminded the jury. "But emotion is not evidence." There was a hush in the courtroom. It was a bold tactic suggesting that the weight of the testimony, the images it conjured, could be performance, not fact. Then they turned to Jennifer Lopez. The defense introduced emails from years past. Polished, friendly, even affectionate. Communications between her and Diddy's camp that they claimed demonstrated no fear, no conflict until now. They didn't directly accuse her of falsehood. Instead, they questioned her memory. "Trauma distorts perception," the attorney said, "and stories change with time." The courtroom sat stiff, but the prosecution wasn't shaken. They responded with a new piece of testimony. Not from a celebrity, but from someone quieter, a staff member, a name not famous, but present. The woman whose identity was shielded for safety appeared via live video. She recounted her first and only experience working an event at the estate. "They told me, 'Don't speak unless spoken to,'" she said. "That if I see something strange, it's not my place. I served drinks. I never asked questions. But I remember one girl." Her voice caught. She looked lost. Too young. No ID. She didn't smile. I asked if she was okay. She didn't answer. Just stared. Her account was not dramatic. It was steady. But its simplicity gave it force. The prosecution leaned in. "Was this the only time you witnessed something like this?" She shook her head. "No. I just never knew who to tell." Then came a pivot. The prosecution introduced financial records payments made to private contractors, all routed through shell companies. The dates coincided with major events at the mansion. The amounts were substantial. The services vague. Security consultation, interior services, private entertainment. The courtroom's mood changed. The defense's tone of calculated doubt was losing ground to a chorus of overlapping truths. And still, Diddy hadn't spoken. Until now. As the judge allowed a brief statement from the defendant, The room leaned in. Diddy stood. His voice was low but steady. I built my life from nothing, he said. Every party, every handshake, every dollar, I earned it. And now people want to tear it down. They want to make me the story. He paused. This is not who I am. But then he faltered. For the first time, his words thinned. They think I was pulling the strings, he added. But you don't run an empire by watching everything. Sometimes things happen without you. It was not an admission, but it wasn't denial either. It was ambiguity enough to rattle the room. As the session closed, reporters rushed from the courthouse. Commentators analyzed every sentence. Some believed Diddy had cracked. Others thought he had calculated his vulnerability. But everyone agreed on one thing: the story had changed him. Meanwhile, back inside, a final motion was filed. The prosecution intended to introduce the term the list not as rumor, but as documented evidence. It began as a rumor, a whisper in the margins. A ghost passed between insiders who never spoke publicly. But in the final stretch of the trial, it became undeniable. The list was real, and its emergence changed everything. When court resumed, there was no dramatic music, no lights dimming, just the steady voice of the prosecution as they introduced the final piece of their case. This document they began holding up a sealed folder contains names, dates, file numbers. It is not fiction. It is not myth. It is a system. With permission from the court, the document was entered into evidence. Its contents were not read aloud. Privacy laws demanded caution, but its existence was confirmed. Cross-referenced against testimony from Leonardo DiCaprio, anonymous witnesses, and internal emails, the list appeared to match accounts of compromised guests, all videotaped in various states of vulnerability during events hosted by Diddy's inner circle. Some of the individuals listed were well known, others were not. But the message was consistent. Silence had been engineered. According to expert testimony, the list operated not as blackmail in the traditional sense, but as leverage, informal yet powerful. It ensured obedience, said a digital forensic analyst, a reminder that no one walks away clean. Jennifer Lopez was called back to the stand for a final reflection. She didn't cry. She didn't break. I was lucky, she said. I walked away. Others didn't even know they were caught. Her words were simple, but their clarity pierced through months of shadows. The defense objected to the admissibility of the list, citing chain of custody issues and privacy violations. But the judge overruled. This court will not ignore credible corroboration, the judge said. The truth may be uncomfortable, but it is still the truth. As murmurs swept the gallery, Diddy remained silent. No further statements, no rebuttals. Instead, he simply looked ahead, at the jury, at nothing. But the damage by now was already irreversible. That afternoon, the final witness, a former industry executive, testified under anonymity. His statement was concise, but devastating. The list kept people close, made them loyal. That's how the empire held. And with that, the prosecution rested. The courtroom sat suspended in stillness. The weight of what had been heard, seen, felt was almost too much to speak aloud. Jennifer Lopez, once seen as collateral in a rising mogul's orbit, had helped expose the architecture of manipulation. Leonardo DiCaprio, the reluctant observer, had become a voice of conscience. And the man once known for controlling every beat, every deal, every room he entered, now sat in silence, watching the pillars fall. Outside the courthouse, the press stood in clusters. No shouting this time, just reflection. The trial wasn't just about crimes. It was about a culture of fear, of fame, of forced silence. And now, with the list confirmed, the reckoning was complete. As court adjourned for the final time, the judge offered no flourish. Just a simple phrase. We have heard enough. The jury will decide, and they will. But for now, the final chapter doesn't belong to a courtroom. It belongs to the world watching, questioning what they once accepted, and realizing that, behind every spotlight, a shadow waits. This was more than a trial. This was the end of a silence.